Вітаю сьогодні.
Greetings from Ukraine Crisis Media Center. Greetings to everyone who is watching us online. And today we have a usual unusual event. You know that Geopolitical Talks as a format is about what is going on in the world. And in fact, it's not quite often that we meet considering the very dynamic and high turbulence and the changes. And today I think that you will be glad to see in these talks Pavlo Klimkin, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, who was the recent minister, considering the fact that during his cadency, the Russians, a bit earlier, they invaded Ukraine and they started the war in Europe. And therefore, lots of the things which are happening at the moment, in my opinion, I was also the part of that period, and we have. It's not that similar, but some things are still in common. And Mr. Pavlo Klimkin is the person who can tell you about the trends, who can show you a bigger general picture, more than we can see from the recent events, the current events. And beside that, he is a political activist from the Renaissance Foundation, Return Back Alive, and the other things he's working on. And I think that we will have very interesting and fruitful discussion today, and I will try to be not discussing that much the current events, but considering the interest from the journalists, considering the fact that we have audience here, I cannot skip this question when the negotiations between Ukraine and the U.S. starts in the Saudi Arabia. Right now, when we have our meeting during this session of the geopolitical talks, and that are the events which, in fact, in the context, in the very difficult historical period for both Ukraine and Ukrainian history. So the question is maybe similar to what you were asked recently, but I think that so far we did not get the answer. The first question is, why the Saudi Arabia? Why Saudi Arabia? Why Jeddah? And what is the influence of Saudi Arabia? And because we know that before that the negotiations between the U.S. and Ukraine were happening in the Washington or the other places. So I would like to hear your opinion on that. First of all, greetings everyone. Mr. Valeriy, thank you very much for the invitation. That is legendary. Without any exaggeration, this platform was established during Maidan period and Euromaidan, and the reality is changing all the time, and it's a pleasure for me to be with you here. Thank you. Thank you for greeting Ukraine Crisis Media Center. We are not celebrating, but we had Mr. Pavlo Anatolyevich was greeting us with the 10th anniversary, and this year it's the 11th anniversary of our Ukraine Crisis Media Center. We do not have the celebration, but because we have so many ongoing events, yes, it's actually a very positive thing. And why Jeddah? That is probably the easiest, the simplest question, because the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia didn't build the unique project, which costs around, it's crazy money. According to some estimations, it's 500 billion plus. That is going to be the territory which is going to cover probably even 10,000 or even more square kilometers. And I think that Mohammed bin Salman would have liked to organize the meetings, negotiation there, but so far they have only two options, Riyadh and Jeddah. And as for the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, that is a quite simple, understandable question. That is a pass from um, the U.S. Administration, and this pass is very important for the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Only they are the player at the moment who you can be serious about energy markets balances. First of all, oil, but also gas. They are the only ones who you, if of course, if there will be a negotiation, if there will be agreement on the prices, and that is one of the grounds of the programs of President Donald Trump's, and decreasing the prices on this stage because of talks in the U.S. It's impossible, but with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, it's possible. The second thing, it's emotional question for Saudi Arabia to become the player of the second level, and that is a serious thing for them. The Middle East at some point is becoming something what Vienna was during the Cold War. So all the difficult mediations are happening there. Qatar is more famous as mediator because most of the negotiations are happening there, less negotiations happening in Oman, of course, Abu Dhabi, but at the moment, Saudi Arabia. And Saudi Arabia got the chance to show that they are number one, even in this component. The third element is that for this administration, communication with Saudi Arabia without important positive pass on the normalization of the relations with Israel is quite hard. In all the previous discussions, the question of the guarantees for Saudi Arabia was raised, but also the topic of the establishment of the nuclear cycle, which is critically important for them. When in their relations with Iran, and Mohammed bin Salman gets the opportunity in this way to say that we are in fact number one and not someone else in the scale of this region and in the broader Middle East, even though Middle East, that is something that we got from somewhere, we do not know even from where, maybe from the Soviet past, and typically it's called Middle East and not the Close East, as it was called in the Soviet Union. Let's use, but I'm going to use the terminology we got used to. So there are few fundamental questions why the U.S. decided to make it happen in Saudi Arabia. At the same time, they can be talking to everyone. They can be inviting everyone. They can be flying there from any direction, from different states, and for the leaders of these states is also safe. It's not just because of the distance, but also because of the safety. So the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia has their added value in this story, and in my opinion, they can be creative about it. And the plans, as far as I know from what I've heard in Riyadh, they are quite significant to catapult themselves in the higher league through these negotiations. Okay, so I haven't heard any kind of explanations in this way because there were lots of questions regarding the delegations, preparations of the visit, but nobody could explain. And thank you very much for explaining why the country has to change a bilateral type of meeting, which is showing how close the partners are, and now we have a mediator. In fact, we have to be talking with Washington through the mediator. But maybe Saudi Arabia is just a kind of host in this case to create the place. So, by the way, we do not know what is their role. Maybe they are going to participate these negotiations. There were the cases when the host is actively participating the negotiations, and there are the cases when it's just a platform to organize the negotiations. So let's think that it's the last option. So, okay, the next question, the following question. So we constantly hear that Ukrainian delegation went to Saudi Arabia. Someone leads it, and they are going to have negotiations. Nobody is saying that it's just a meeting. Official visit of the president of Ukraine to Saudi Arabia. No, it is said that there are negotiations and negotiations, which means that they are going to sign some important documents. And considering the experience, I have not only your experience, not only as a Minister of Foreign Affairs, but also you had different positions in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Should this delegation, from your perspective, get any kind of directives, any kind of list of delegation? Do they have any kind of authorities to sign the agreements? And also the question, so what if seeing so far in mass media the project of the market agreement on the rare minerals? So this agreement requires this signature from Ukraine as a kind of international agreement, or it is enough to have the signature from the Cabinet of Ministers, as it is now said. So it's a specific question, but nevertheless. So the first thing is more important. Should our delegation get from the president some kind of solid directives and instructions on how everything should be organized, considering the fact that today we were told that the president of Volodymyr Zelensky here to Saudi Arabia has finished. So it started yesterday in the evening, and today it is over. I remember these kind of visits. That was not a good reason why these meetings in Saudi Arabia happened. When lots of delegations came to the funerals of the head of the state, and the prince was meeting everyone. But even under these conditions, we didn't have enough time. 5 hours is not enough to participate everything. And now suddenly such a fast visit of the president of Ukraine to Saudi Arabia, the delegation is staying there. Who is the head of this delegation? Who has the authorities? So do you have any kind of clarity regarding this issue? In fact, that is a question from the point of view of organization. It's not something that I can answer you right now. But as for the legal part, it's absolutely unclear. If our delegation in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia has the mandate to make the decisions and to represent our position, that would have been logical, because from the American side, that is the official representatives that are not only those who were appointed by different orders of Trump, and they are all, and that also makes them official representatives. For example, Mr. Witkov, but also that is a state secretary, that is advisory on the national security. That are the people who have, according to the American system, who have the clear mandate, according to constitution, not only according to some separate laws. And it means that negotiations with them, if it is outside of the framework of the meeting, we can consider that to be a meeting. But in this case, you cannot get any kind of results from this meeting. It means that it's going to be exchange of position. That is also very important. But nevertheless, if it is the real possibility to get some results, in this case, there should be some certain directives that this decree, this order can be classified. It doesn't mean that we will understand the logics of these directives, but that would have been absolutely logical. And as for the agreement, or as they are going to call it, contract or agreement. So quite possible it can go through the Cabinet of Ministers because there are different versions of these text, and they have more kind of framework agreement, and framework is something that is going to be implemented on the political level, meaning that it depends on the further political decisions on how, when, what will be the timeline, and how it is going to be implemented. And that is absolutely normal. But something tells me that at some point we will have an issue of the legal status of this agreement, because, in fact, for us, any kind of resources is the property of the nation. That is something that is written black and white in our constitution. If we are making the decision in the framework of our legal position, it's also possible, but whether are all the decisions are in the framework of the Cabinet of Ministers, no one can answer you this question. I had lots of different discussions regarding this issue with our friends also, and they consider that to be kind of target we can be moving forward to, and they absolutely seriously think that if not the element of the guarantees of security, but something that is regulating the presence of the U.S. On the territory of Ukraine, and according to the mentality of those who are now in the U.S. administration, they have to be. In this way, they will help Ukrainians to be perceived through American lens. Will it work out? Well, it's absolutely unobvious. And therefore, there is an issue of the implementation of this agreement, and we will have lots of issues regarding its implementation, and that is something we will have to resolve in the future. Well, in fact, the logic is quite clear, and probably it's correct, because my opinion in this case is that maybe it's more legally focused. You mentioned the internal legislation and the law on the international agreements, Article 1.3.g. It is said that the agreements of where the territories or the resources of Ukraine are considered that are the agreements which require from Ukraine, only from Ukraine, the signature. So that is a president or the authorized person to do that. In this case, without the authorization, the Minister of Foreign Affairs can do that. He got this mandate from the government. So we are on the stage when we are trying to overcome this element. But it seems to me that is a kind of forecast. So this agreement is going to be not about the rare minerals. It's going to be about absolutely different things. We are hearing about the fund, it's going to be about Ukrainian assets, about Ukrainian ports, about Naftogaz, about all the entities, strategical entities. And in this case, I'm not going to evaluate whether it's good for Ukraine or bad. The only thing we have to understand is that that should be as a result of probably not the rare minerals, which in fact in Ukraine we have a few ones. Maybe Ukraine is on the 14th place in the world on the developed rare minerals. And therefore, it's quite clear that the U.S. has more information on that, and their desires, their intentions, which we've heard a few times, will be more solid today during the process of signing this agreement. I'm for signing this agreement, but we have to understand that after that we will have the process of the implementation, which you've mentioned. I would like to add that we have absolute confusion in the documents. We call it rare minerals, but our partners are talking about critical minerals. So, for example, what we have for example, unique ones, so that is titanium or beryllium, and even lithium. They are not rare minerals according to the school chemistry course. We have some rare minerals, but whether they are critical for the world economy, no. Are they important? Yes. But I absolutely agree with you. We are talking about the critical assets, and Americans not just want to start fast working with them. At some point, it is also the guarantee for the perspective that these critical assets will not be used by someone else, for example, by China or India. And Washington is quite clearly state that during different discussions. And therefore, this framework we are talking about is a multi-layer one, in fact. And when we will start implementing it, at that point, at that stage, we will have the most complicated legal and not only legal issues. That is not something we will be discussing today or tomorrow, but maybe the day after yesterday. Well, yes, I think that is the way how we have to perceive it. We have to perceive it from the point of view of the content. There are no beneficial or good things and bad things. It depends on the content and how it is implemented. And the simple recommendations we have, and I think that you support it as well, to be acting according to the legislation of Ukraine and the procedures which are mentioned in the law on the international agreements and the law of Ukraine. So the thing which was already mentioned, we need the U.S. to be in the game, if not on this side. I have the observation that some people respond very emotionally on what the president of the U.S. does and his team, and people respond emotionally not only in Ukraine but all around the world. For me, and maybe for you, that is quite weird, because we remember very clear 2016, 2017, and we know that everything is cyclical, but not that fast, not that aggressive, not that fast, and not with this level of the informational coverage as we have at the moment. I think that Farage was saying, one of the oppositional politicians in the UK says, everything Donald Trump says you have to be perceiving seriously, but not to take his words literally. So we've seen the swings regarding intelligence, regarding weapons, ammunition, and lots of Ukrainians perceive it literally, and there's something not reversible. So the question goes beyond today's news, and everyone has to do their own conclusions. I do not want you to think some certain way, but the key question, in the next 5 years, the U.S., let's take 5 years, 5 years, and the U.S. assistance, not only the military one, but also political sanction assistance, is it a critical element for Ukraine to preserve Ukraine, to preserve our national interest? Or, as many suggest us, we have to be realistic, we have to make the conclusion that we've lost the U.S. and to be looking for support in Europe, as they say, because Europe is quite uneven. That is an important thing for us to understand when we are defining our Ukrainian strategy. Should we be looking after the complicated meeting, difficult meeting in Washington? Should we be looking for the partners? Is it the correct way, or should we be just make a hard stop and show the U.S. that the statements made on different levels that Ukraine cannot survive without Starlinks, and we should have lost this war. And that is Rubio said. If Ukraine didn't have Starlink, the Russian troops would have been already in Poland. So what do you think? So I more or less, as a diplomat, I can imagine what you will say. But speaking of the strategy, what is the role of the U.S., Europe, and maybe you see some other players who are on the side of Ukraine in this situation? My short answer is yes. The U.S. is absolutely critical. Nobody can substitute them in the midterm perspective, and I do not see enough strong decisions or the strong emotions and drive among the Europeans, and I do not mean the heads of the state, but about among the citizens, to change the reality they are existing in. And it doesn't mean that it is impossible for us to have more support from the European Union, but nevertheless, the thing which is happening at the moment, the things which are developed by the U.S., what the U.S. can do at the moment, that is absolutely unique, and we cannot refuse from it. And we are not talking about just political support. As an example, Starlink, that is a great example because we can be looking for different options. And in fact, some of the options are now developed by the Europeans, and not only them, but there are no other options for Starlink. So he is a modalist. So that is a unique technology. Technology which can be substituted in some time if you have significant investments. But as of now, it is impossible. And that is the reality. The reality, everyone who understands at least something in these things, in these issues. Speaking of the other technologies, intelligence, analysis, logistics, and let's say artificial intelligence, which is bonding absolutely different system of the decision making. In this case, Europe is still not even behind the US, but very far behind the US. It doesn't mean that Europe cannot do the leap. It is possible if they want, but as a moment, I think that this leap will be will have multi stages. Some things will be great, but some things are, as Americans say, it's rolling the beer can. So that is something that we cannot understand fully. Will it be easy to be negotiating with the U.S.? No, because at the moment there is existential conflict regarding the future with the artificial intelligence and new technologies. It means the significant impact on the lifestyle, on the identification of our self-identification and our way and where did we come from if we are talking about the identity. And that means that we have it will have an impact on how we earn money. It affects our financial streams and, in fact, financial flows, and, in fact, in the U.S. business and even in the U.S. Technological business and also in the administration. And in American political in general, there is a fundamental discussion. And it is so polarized that people who are in this discussion, they are ready to listen, but they are not ready to hear. That is on the one hand. On the one hand, Europe is perceived as weak democracy which is not investing in sustainability of their societies, which is not the source of the protection of the Western civilization. And that is something the Vice President of the U.S. Quite directly said during his speech during the Munich Security Conference. And that caused the flow of emotions. And at the same time, Americans are seriously thinking about the modus vivendi, the protection model should be for Europe and for the other allies. And the U.S. has other allies which have, and they are bound with bilateral security agreements, for example, South Korea or Japan. And there is the opinion in the new administration that NATO is good and we have to preserve it completely. But there are the others who say that NATO is quite well, so we have to keep the nuclear part and a nuclear component, and as for the rest, everyone has to do their best. But also there are the people who say that NATO is something obsolete reality of the 20th century, which reflected the situation after the Second World War. And now it's in the dead end. And also Europe is irritated by the fact that the part, I would like to underline, the part, not everyone, the part of ideological reality of the U.S., they are working with some political and non-political movements in Europe to build another political system which does not foresee the preservation of the European Union as it is now. And that creates the problem for the current administration, between the current administration and the European Union. And in fact, that is existential and crucial. And we will have to observe these problems for some time. We do not know how the situation is going to develop. And on this background, I do understand your hint. We have the People's Republic of China, who observe all the situation with their Asian smile, and they say, well, we waited enough and now we have a chance, so we can be talking to the US ourselves. And now both China and India, as far as I understand from the discussions I had, they have few scenarios of how the events can be developed. And of course, they are worried about the trade, especially the technological competition. But nevertheless, I cannot observe the deep worry. So, of course, they are going to will try to build their separate relations with Europe. I would like to underline Europe because before that, India and China was trying to have relations with separate countries, and they cared only about the trade rules and the other things. And now, both China and India are thinking whether they should perceive as Europe as some political reality. And as far as I understand, maybe I do not fully understand that. Maybe I misunderstand the way how they make the decision. They did not decide what will be their next strategy, or maybe they intentionally do not want to make this decision now. So we've discussed that there is a second layer of geopolitical players who which is growing very actively. That is the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the Republic of Turkey, and Southern Africa. And these countries, they start to affect the geopolitical picture. And without them, well, when we have the discussions and we are asked about whether the U.S. and China can divide the world in two, with Russia in three, with India in four, with Brazil in five. No, it doesn't work this way. No, only on the next Mundial they can divide in this. No, it's not the option. From football perspective, I do not have time for football, but I'm a big fan of football because you know that the next match is going to be held in the U.S. The U.S., Canada, and Mexico. Yes, it's a funny thing. I can tell you even more. Donald Trump recently found out about it when he was given. No, he knew. No, he didn't. It was unknown until Infantino, the president of FIFA, didn't bring to the U.S. The cup, and after there were the discussion in this context. It is interesting and I think that is going to be the red line regarding Canada or Mexico, the 51st state, and Mondial is the biggest TV event. So Donald Trump is going to be the key player on this Mondial. You should see how friendly he is going to be to Canada, to Mexico. Well, during this time only, that is June-July period. And by the way, even though it's weird, in the U.S. we have lots of events during his presidency, including the Olympic Games, as far as I remember. And that are the events which are weird for us because we have war in our country. And you said absolutely correct that no time for football. But many people in Ukraine are still, and by the way, in Ukraine, they are watching, they are interested in that. And in the world, people are more interested in football than in war. And here I would like to ask you. So I've heard and we've heard the answer, diplomatic answer regarding Rubio's statement, and I will tell you my opinion. Not thanks to Starlink only, Ukraine is keeping the front line. And it's been 11 years, and after the full-scale war, that is the 4th year of the full-scale war. And if we will agree that thanks to some certain person, thanks to Starlinks, thanks to those politician or the other one, Ukraine heroically resisted. And by the way, and here I'm coming to the next question. Violating the statute of the UN, which nobody is mentioning now, where there should have been the coalition, there should be embargo for the aggressor, violating all these rules and provisions. So now Ukraine is blamed that, look, without our weapon, you wouldn't have survived. And I think that, well, you know, it's unfair. It feels like, even on the diplomatic level, it feels unfair. China, we have to admit that they have not the best position, in my opinion, between Ukraine and the Russian Federation, but they are diplomatically following their statements, and diplomacy works there in the traditional way. And I think that is absolutely correct when in Ukraine people sensitively perceive all the situation, and therefore the question. That is a complicated question. I cannot answer this question. I was asked by the journalist this question, so I will readdress this question. How Ukraine can return all the world, at least the key countries, for them to understand that we are facing aggression, that are not just two countries that in war, that there are the violation of the second provision of the statute of the UN. For example, Korea, situation in Korea. There was a decision of the Council of Security Council of the UN. In fact, the Soviet Union got the instruction, everything worked out. But in fact, everyone knows that if there is aggressor, then there is a coalition, military coalition, and all the countries were there. France was there, the UK, Canada. They have provided us with the troops. But there is reality. But okay, if we will lose this narrative, the narrative which we are forced to follow, just to stop, and the aggressor will not be punished, the simple answer is it's bad. Yes, in fact, it will lead to something. By the way, the U.S. doesn't think that way, as we have seen. But nevertheless, should we put on the stake everything to return the narratives, or you think that no law and the rule of jungle is working in this world? So let me return to the Starlink. I think that we have to learn not just to perceive calmly politically incorrect messages, but we also have to learn how to answer calmly and also politely incorrect to answer them. And until the moment we will perceive it personally and as an offense, and our emotions will be so tight, it will be very hard for us to deal with the current political reality in the U.S. I know quite well the situation on the front line because in 2022 I was doing what was important at that moment when we had constant cyber attacks and they had the standard attacks on the security systems, and Starlink played a very important role in this case. And it's quite obvious that not only Starlink helped us, there are lots of other great stories, but the main thing is that we are here because so far the Americans, neither the previous administration nor this one, they do not understand our mentality, our reality. That is a mystery for them. But nevertheless, some technologies, some American technologies used in the army, they are critical for us. It doesn't mean that we will not survive without them, but it means that it will be much harder for them to continue without them. We have to be very calm about that, we should not be very polite to absolutely everyone. And in polite way is much better perceived by some people. So calmly and impolite. I'm very sorry for interrupting you, but maybe the way the Polish did it. If there will be statements like that, because it was directed not on us, it was it was in the dialogue with the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Poland, and he answered quite straight. We ordered, we paid, and if we need, we order something else. So, there are the other options. Maybe they are, at the moment, they are not on the table. But nevertheless, let's be honest, when Donald Musk is, when they got, when Musk got the order, I remember that there were the alternatives also from Europe, but he was given the money for the settlements, and that pulled back the competitors. The second thing is that there are the issues of the space technologies, and Ukraine is absolutely silent regarding that, because even despite a very big space, the orbits of the orbits are quite limited. China, during the last 2 years, they have made 2 more times satellite than they did before. They have more than 1,000 at the moment. So Elon Musk wants to have thousands to make it 12 or 14,000 in space. So Ukraine is silent regarding that, meaning that to get alternative. And only now we have these statements saying that we will find something, we will procure something else. And I can say that according to the data I have, there are the systems which require 1, maximum 2 years to be finalized, and they are in place, and that is something that should give us hope. And I know that technical issues and both the return back alive, yes, I do understand what I'm talking about, but nevertheless, it's all about politics, and I do not understand why Radev decided to push this story. And the second thing, I do not understand why he decided to push this story in this way, and I do not support Musk's answer when he says keep quiet. So I do not like that, but nevertheless he is in the story which he do not understands fully, A, and B, I do not understand why he did it in this way. So that is why I say that sometimes you have to understand not just what to discuss, but how to discuss. And that is also important thing. For improving the technologies in 1 year and to bring it to the level of Starlink, I think that is possible, but technically difficult. As the person who finished the agrophysics and cosmic technologies faculty, I can say let's return to the international law and the UN statute and violation, because I think that everyone has forgotten about it. Yes, and in this reality, sometimes I like to compare in this way that we live in Matrix movies. So in fact, we live in some reality which is clear for us, which is comfortable for us, but then when we look in some other direction, we can see absolutely different reality, and that is the reality we live in for quite a long time. And when I'm told that at the moment the rest of the diplomatic relations is being destroyed, I think that only facades are remaining at the moment. When everything happened in 2014, when there was attack on Kyiv and then on Donetsk and Luhansk Oblast, I think that at that time the international law did not work at all. And the fact that they cannot admit that this reality didn't exist at that time as the efficient way to respond aggression and the option to have to make a pressure, that it played a very bad joke on us, and also it played a bad joke with those who wanted to leave this thing as a facade and to be playing, continue playing. So it's not about praising someone or blaming something or to be pointing our fingers at someone, but we have to admit the problems when they occur. And I think that the current legal system, in fact, is fragmented. It works in some parts, and in some parts it doesn't work. So the complex system which was established on the international law and in the international humanitarian law in this world does not exist. Yes, indeed, but then we have another question. When the Russian Federation is using the tribune, the Security Council tribune, and we have seen the unique situation when situatively the position of China, U.S. and Russia were the same regarding removing the word aggressor, which will not have but might have some consequences if we do that for Ukraine and for the smaller countries. So we will remove this possibility to use the international law. In this case, the big countries, well, they are just dominating and we will continue playing like these rules are in place. Or the other option, we will try to return the integrity of the legal system or some kind of substitution, something that will be perceived. And by the way, the representatives of the China in Europe was mentioning that. Recently, they said that negotiations regarding the peace in Europe, regarding Russian war in Ukraine, cannot be ongoing without Europe, including China. We see that China, which urges which cause us to be relying on the international law, of course, in their own way, how they perceive it, but nevertheless, international law. So, for example, discussion, as an example. So now we have lots of discussions, especially abroad, about peacemakers. As far as I know, this sphere, I still rely, as well as you, on the international law and the UN and the other peacemaking formats. So we perceive it in some formats. We are thinking about the conventions, about regulations. So I can see people nodding their hats, who were the part of the peacemaking operations and who regulating situation this way. If we do not take it in account in this way, then on the grounds of which rules, on which regulations, every time we are making the decision. So it means that we will need to have the separate agreements for each time, for each situation, without paying attention to the basic positions stated by the international law? No. Last week, we had a very interesting discussion where I was asked how do I perceive, considering the fact that we already mentioned Elon Musk, how do I perceive his position regarding the fact that the U.S. has to leave not only NATO but also UN. That was the discussion. And there were a few representatives of Europe, and I said that is in fact the idea you have to consider. And they were so surprised. And when I said that in this way you will be able to rewrite the statute of the UN, and it will allow us to push the reforms, because it will lead to the situation both political and business model of the UN will not be functional. We cannot be living without something. So we need at least something that gives us some kind of regulations, but we cannot be living with something on worse. So let's fundamentally rewrite for the 21st century the grounds which we have at the moment. And the process of the rewriting can give us the possibility of the partial functionality of the current system, and that is going to be the transfer period, and it's not going to be a simple one. But only these kind of crises, so when one of the key players will say that he is not, he is living this reality, will lead to fundamental changes in the current institutions. And what does the current system give us? When the permanent members of the Security Council are committing an act of aggression against us, and we can even call it, even formally, the war, because for this we need the Security Council decision. And I think that this kind of system gives us next to nothing. Should this kind of organization, like, for example, Meteorological Union, or we have lots of different discussions around it, and the system of organization of the UN, for example, the IAEA, no one wants to cancel them today and tomorrow cancel, because nuclear security wanted to be under control and for this organization to be trusted. But if we won't rewrite the statute, and if we won't understand how we are going to implement it, we will live in this simultaneous reality. And I like to rewrite this reality. That is my personal position, and that is something I was mentioning quite a few times in both the closed discussion and the open one. So for many people it is a kind of scary scenario, but without these kind of catastrophic in both positive and negative sense development of the situation, UN will not be existing. From the current state of the UN, to Ukraine does not benefit at all, both from the legal and political perspective. And that is something I'm trying to explain to the others. Nobody say that we have to cancel, to destroy it tomorrow. It's obvious that there should be kind of complicated transfer periods, but the discussion on the reform should not be finished with the report which we put on the shelf. You know that there is a sad joke regarding the reforms of the Council, Security Council requires the Third World War. Well, I think that there is one more option. When one of the key players, or a few key players, they agree that they do not want to live this way. That is a bit better than the Third World War, and with my pleasure I would have followed this way. Well, we can say that as when it comes to the security guarantee, this mechanism doesn't work at all. That's fact. Even though weaker or stronger. Ukraine is still not among those two sides, the biggest ones, and we have to appeal and we have to use the mechanism efficiently. Returning to Europe and what we were discussing. So you said a very important thing that China is now considering the option of the Union. The UK, despite the fact that it's not in the European Union, they are still leading in security part. I mean, the interaction, for example, the Prime Minister of the UK is gathering. So they have some certain kind of common challenges, and the competition, which typically we observed, we cannot see it, but we sometimes see it when the military production is now discussed. And then 150 billion, okay, and where are we going to do that? French and Germans are competing again. So the question is very interesting, even though it's something, it's not the top priority at the moment, but probably for you, it is something you're interested in, because I know that you still have contacts in Germany since the time when you worked in Germany as the ambassador of Ukraine to Germany. And now the coalition is being formed, and it seems like some kind of fundamental things were discussed, and let's hope that the process will be faster. And then the chancellor, Germany, we cannot hear much from them, but nevertheless, the role of Germany and its ability as the biggest economy in Europe to be leading the process, what kind of leadership it could be, and can we be considering the issue? So you've mentioned it today, the nuclear umbrella for the European Union, France, Germany, the UK. Well, I mean, these countries, first of all. Why I mentioned the nuclear umbrella? Because that is one of the parts of the components of the strategic discussion. Of course, we cannot be blaming Charles de Gaulle in France, but nevertheless, thanks to this position, this idea of the joint production of the nuclear weapons, it went on the background. Now it's raising again. First, the part of the question, the role of Germany, and the second one, can we, for example, when we're talking about nuclear umbrella, can we be relying on the key countries? Well, Germans gradually start to understand that the previous reality is in the past, and they cannot decide yet. What are they going to do? They understand that they need more money, and for the first time they are saying that the expenditures for the security theoretically should not be limited, and there is a discussion regarding how should they do that and through which adapt mechanism. And for that they need constitutional decisions, because loans are limited and debts are limited by the constitutional decisions. In Germany, beside the fact that it's 25% of the European economy, there are a few very great companies which work in the security dimension. But also there are some interesting startups which theoretically can be very, very efficient with some assistance, and you can find lots of interesting things. And therefore, speaking of Germany, I'm more optimistic than I was a few years ago. Taurus, will we have Taurus? Oh no, it's something that is related to what is developing in the dialogue with Americans. So Taurus is not a separate decision of the Germany government separately, and it's not the way how it was under the previous administration. And if you think that the change of the coalition will change it, well, it changes it, but it's not going to be the decision of Germany only. And as for the umbrella, I'm a big fan of umbrella, but I do not think that it should be just by expansion of the French or German part. That should be the European thing. It should be It is something like anti-missile dome, and the Europeans, they do not have many of these things. But as for the nuclear part, they can invent something. And the problem is not the money. The problem is that you have to persuade the society in these countries to that security is value. Security so far is not a value in Europe. It is value for us, but not for them. And without this component, if Europeans will not understand this, so there will be no leap for Europe. And that is something that the most important elements of the future will be around all these things. And as for the possibility to expand this shield over us, yeah, that is one of the options, in my opinion. But how should the European policy look like? Nobody can tell you. Speaking of the international law, from the point of view of the legal statements, the Article 42.7 from the Lisbon Agreement is much better than the Article 5 from NATO. But nevertheless, it's just empty words under this political reality. And therefore, good legal wording doesn't mean that they will be implemented right away, as well as the last Helsinki summit. Well, good ones. It has even some sense, but the decisions made there, we agreed to work on something. Well, in fact, legally, liability is not in place. It means it doesn't mean that they are not going to work, but in the framework of the current European Union, if you do not have the binding component, in this case it's very complicated, and therefore the European Union has to learn how to work independently from those who are creating the obstacles. And even if someone is trying to distract them from this way, they have to know how to overcome it. And moreover, I think that the European Union has to be reloaded, and it has to be reframed for the 21st century. And at the moment, it's not that fast. It's quite slow, but I think that it will be faster, and maybe not in the positive way. Yes, you have underlined it in the right way. I'd like to remind you that there is a part of the basic agreement, but there is another thing. Even despite the fact that the European Union is following the structure in some parts of NATO. But nevertheless, Article 5 of the Washington Agreement was applied, and it was efficient, even under the situation when the U.S. has signed it. Yes, there are some certain nuances, but I think there is no need to remind the partners and the U.S. first of all that at that time it was applied when U.S. was attacking. And Ukraine, by the way, even though it was not a NATO country, it participated this coalition. And that was not a coalition, that was a broader coalition, but nevertheless, let's not forget about this, that Ukraine has contributed. And we're protecting the national interest of the U.S. as they formulated it. And the second conclusion I make is that the European Union cannot be the grounds of the guarantee of the security guarantees for Ukraine. And the third thing, which we can state, we can be talking about a big idea of the umbrella, of the joint umbrella for the European joint nuclear umbrella for Europe. And I think that I would like to add here something that is what kind of role Ukraine can have here. We can have the missiles here. We can support with the bombers, and that can be Ukrainian systems, by the way. The joint systems, not the ones which we have just here. That is just the possibility of security and protection as it works in the other countries. So, for example, Belarus, which has the umbrella from the Russian Federation, which they got from the Russian Federation. And therefore, this is a topic which, in my opinion, requires a separate discussion, and therefore I would like to... we are not going to dive deeper into it and how the situation is going to end up on this stage. And therefore, I would like to return to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, which you respect, like I know that you like it. Well, I do not like these forecasts, and we are discussing something, and maybe they have the OU signing the agreement at the moment. But nevertheless, there are lots of different scenarios on how the situation can develop, but nevertheless, there are some broad ones. So this question is quite simple. Will the situation with Russian war in Ukraine, will it move towards some ceasefire, or will the situation be developing fast as the U.S. says? We've seen the statements of Donald Trump that is going to take a few days. And even though we can be perceiving these statements in different ways, but nevertheless, we understand that he thinks that it's possible very fast. And then after that, as far as I know, the visit to Moscow is planned on the 13th. So Mr. Vitkov is going to Moscow on the 13th. And we already discussed that the president of Ukraine is staying there, and I will tell it's my personal opinion, maybe because he wants to have the constant touch with the delegation, or maybe he wants to say something to Americans personally. So that is important element. But nevertheless, do you think that it's going to be fast, or you think that we will have some second stage where we will have a broader engagement on the table of both the UK, which we were discussing, and Germany and France? Or you think that everything is going to happen fast, not maybe in the next days, but in the next weeks, month? What do you think? What do you think about it? Maybe you have some forecast. Well, I have the feeling that American administration will make a pressure with everything they can and they cannot to get at least the temporary ceasefire, or better to say, because it's more accurate from the perspective of the terminology, to stop the military actions. Partial a partial stop is not something Trump is intending to have. They are not relying on different mechanisms of monitoring and the other things. And the funny thing is that if Trump will have this agreement, then they have to observe it, to monitor, and because otherwise lots of things will be on the shoulders of those who are not going to follow these rules. And that is a new logic which is against of the previous wars and the conflicts. But what I observe now regarding Washington is that they want to have ceasefire on any price. And once again, it doesn't mean that after that we won't have the problems later, that there won't be some negotiation process later. And I think that after a ceasefire, some negotiations are possible in different formats, and maybe even at the same time with the engagement with the Europeans. Because one of the fundamental things regarding the current administration is to make Europe responsible, to take all the financial responsibilities for everything. But it seems that the current administration wants to build the new quality relations with the Russian Federation, and it it's not only about political projects, it's also a broader thing regarding the interaction in the modern world, about interaction that first it should be in place, and second, it from the so to say from the value perspective, or from the perspective of the basic principles, there is understanding that these kind of values, they are less dangerous for the current logics of the administration, comparing to those they cannot live with, the ones which exist in the framework of polarization. Something that is very offending for us, both politically, emotionally, and offends Europeans very much, when Vice President of the U.S. says to Europeans that the biggest threat is inside Europe and not outside Europe. And in fact, that is quite common point of view in MAGA. It is philosophically and legally justified, and it has its own development in different ways and different frameworks of the interaction. And therefore, my simple answer is that we will see that lots of things are going to happen, because in this reality we became more important than we are for the key players, that the key players consider us to be. And therefore, it depends on us how the key players are going to fight for their vision of the future. Elon Musk once said that the future should look like future, and these logics on how this future should look like, and how, and all the events happening at the moment, they are giving us the understanding on who is going to be around us in the future. And if it is framed in this way, it means that the first stage is most probably is going to be the way how Trump wants it, and the second and the rest of the stages most probably will not be the way how he wants it to be. That is my simple answer. Well, yes. Okay, so many people think that way, and it's going to be some certain point when we'll find out the truth. But I'd like to say that I still doubt that even that conditions which America will build with Russia, that it will be possible, it will be enough for a ceasefire. And it will be hard to force Ukraine to have this ceasefire. So I have the doubts, I have concerns that before the negotiations which are happening right now, there was a statement, official statement, that Ukraine has to give up some territories. And in Russian perspective, that is a legal decision, even though, so they want the legal justification for that. I cannot imagine, but it doesn't mean that Americans can understand the way. Yes, it's absolutely correct, and that's very important. And before I took the question, I'd like to give the chance to the people in the audience, to the journalists, to the experts to ask the question. I'd like to remind you that I absolutely agree that neither in Moscow nor in Washington they do not understand some certain basic things. And that is a question of identity, mentality, and maybe the specifics of decision-making process, even the basic ones. So I can only add that we have to be watching this process very carefully, because I think that people who want to have fast decision on ceasefire, even they support the position that Ukraine cannot legally say that we are giving up the territories, and even the first steps which they have in the committees to remove the administrative division of Ukraine. By the way, that is one of the articles of the constitution which is a barrier to change the constitution, not to. That is the part where it says regarding the division by oblasts. So let's be watching carefully. And despite all my deep respect to the Institute of Presidents and my best wishes to President Zelensky on this very difficult stage, I wish him good luck, but nevertheless, I do not expect much from this visit. It's a kind of interim visit. Well, we'll see, but everyone is watching what is going on in the world, even though it should have been right to consider our capacity enhancement. That is something that we are not going to discuss today. That is a huge topic. So now I'd like to give the opportunity to the audience. Christian, Austrian TV, two questions to Mr. Klimkin. The first question, the previous minister said in one of the interviews when he was talking to the Mr. President in 2022, the only guarantee of security of Ukraine is the armed forces of Ukraine. Considering the fact that so far we can't see any kind of serious guarantees from the U.S., from Europe, what is your opinion on these statements, considering the fact that Israel has other neighbors and Israel has nuclear weapons? And the second question, the external security policy of the European Union. So the European Union is still incapable of finding the same language about Kosovo's independence, because so far 5 countries did not recognize the independence of Kosovo. How Ukraine can be expecting from can rely on the security policies of the European Union if they cannot resolve the Kosovo's question? Thank you very much for asking the question in Ukrainian. Speaking of the first question, it's absolutely obvious when the world is relaunching. You hope you rely or on yourself or on those you trust. And therefore, we have to decide who do we trust. But first of all, we have to be reliant on ourselves. And Bennett was always following this idea. And I remember when we had these discussions when he was a Minister of Education. And he was trying to, so to say, to do some mediation in 2022. And he even thought that some of his initiatives will be successful. But nevertheless, that is a person who clearly understands the necessity of strict, solid steps. And he is absolutely right about it. The only thing is that many of these things can be done, and I think that Ukrainians have unique mentality. But nevertheless, some of the things we still lack. We cannot just start producing the bombers or the MOSR. And by the way, lots of European countries cannot launch their own anti-missile systems. Finland, they are buying Arrow 3, which is produced by Israel and the U.S. So that is a great example, which shows the depth of the European security dimension. And as for the joint policy on security in Europe, it has to change now. And it doesn't mean that Europe does not have, cannot come to the common decision. In fact, there is the logics of the it's the only thing is that they have to understand how they can protect themselves and their survival. And that is the logics I've heard in the European Union. I'm trying to tell the Europeans that you should not be looking for consensus on each and every question. The problem is not that you cannot find consensus. The problem is that you spent a lot of efforts. The only thing you have to do, you have to understand what are the vital questions and what things are changing the mindset or the identity of the Europeans, and what is European identity in the 21st century. And regarding these issues, we have to have not just consensus, but the understanding that we can be acting without extra discussions. Not only without discussion, but without extra discussions. That is something that is really frightening some Europeans, but I think that sooner or later they will come to this. And also, policy is moving in cycles, from crisis to crisis. So when we will have the next crisis, we'll see that again. Kosovo? Well, with Kosovo, everything is absolutely clear. Every country which does not recognize Kosovo does not recognize it from their own reasons. It can be, for example, Romania or Spain. So I think that to overcome it, you need to take Kosovo to bring into the European Union and to limit Kosovo with the classical European principles. And that will be the best way, in my opinion. And in fact, we have to change the logics of the Euro integration around the Western Balkans. We should not be given task and waiting for them to be fulfilled, but to give the task and to say that they have to be fulfilled, like the Trump does. And if not, in this case, something will happen that will make their life worth it. And of course, but that is something I've told publicly. And I think that this region of the Western Balkans, it is crucially important for the European security. And in some cases, the European Union can and should be given the conditions. And if these conditions were not fulfilled, in this case, they have to be at most strict. And if these logics will be applied to Western Balkans, that is going to be fantastic positive things for the European Union. They will show that they are union and not something else. Thank you. Please pass the mic. Petr Kadana, greetings. I'm the former military diplomat. Thank you very much. And Mr. Valeriy has mentioned international law and has suggested to remind our Western partners about Ukrainian achievements. And Mr. Pavlo mentioned the UN, but about reforms after the Third World War. And therefore, I have the question. If we compare the Russian aggression against Ukraine and Iraq's aggression against Kuwait, can we evaluate the results if and when? And when Ukraine will get victory in the World War, which Mark Rutte, Papa of Rome has recognized, and our politologist and Viktor Nebozhenko has already recognized. Thank you. We cannot compare, unfortunately, because Iraq attack on Kuwait was under other conditions. It was happening because they understood that West had enough resources and political will to stop this attack, and it was happening on the background of the fact that this attack was drastically changing the development and the balance of the oil market and the oil prices. And in fact, it was a threat for the West, both from the legal perspective and trust, and from the perspective of their economical sustainability of the West. And therefore, the U.S. led this coalition. They were the ones who built it. They were the ones who engaged different countries. They built the process including reparations and many other things. So it is well known, and it is described in details in books, in articles, and lots of people were working on these. The best lawyers were working on it, and many politicians were working on it, the ones who were building this concept. And we live under absolutely different times. And we also have aggression against our country, about nuclear country. If we did not, if it wasn't nuclear country, that would have been absolutely different situation. That is a second reason why we cannot be compared. And the third reason, if Hussein did it due to his own reasons, the Russian Federation does it not just because they want to occupy something. They are doing that because they are not perceiving. They do not admit our history and all the rest things because it's against the Russian concept of the state civilization. And it was not the case in Iraq and Kuwait case. In that case, they had the reasons, absolutely different reasons. And therefore, comparing these two challenges and different time under different circumstances, and also as a response, in my understanding, there is no point of comparing it. I wish the world would unite in kind of quasi-kingdom regarding these aggression as it happened in Kuwait. But unfortunately, as you can see in the modern world, that is impossible at the moment. We live where we live, and we have to use the reality we have for our protection. As for the Kuwait case, we will not be in that situation. That is not just my opinion. That is the opinion of many other people who mean something in Western and non-Western world. So the example is good, but we cannot use this case in our situation. I would like to add that I agree that it is hard to compare. In fact, there are lots of factors, but nevertheless, if we consider the basic principles of the development of the conflicts and the aggressive actions, in this case, there are few scenarios of the response on this situation. And in fact, the scenario is quite obvious. Fast respond with in strong way, not to give the chance to aggressor to repeat the situation. And you've seen that these kind of actions are giving results. I do not say that it will give you long-term peace, and we can see that on the Korean Peninsula they do not have peace. They have peace? No, they do not have even the peace from the point of view of signing the Korean documents. So Montgomery has signed the documents. MacArthur at that point, he signed the documents. The general of the coalition, and not the Korean government. They had the agreement a few years ago, the attempts of political sign, but they are cancelled by the dictator in North Korea. So they do not have the agreement signed, or the agreement they are following. And moreover, under the previous administration, I do not know how it's going to work out. They have signed the agreement on the nuclear umbrella, and they said that we will provide the nuclear support if needed. So a lot of things are changing, but nevertheless, the key scenarios, I like not to skip them, because all of us, we observe, so to say, they are forcing Ukrainian government to adopt the plan, which is not clear to us, the American plan, which is in fact the Russian plan, so to say. And as a result, that is a kind of approach. So that is a kind of a situation which, so in case if the situation will not work out, this agreement will allow the further movement of the aggressor. So we cannot see any kind of actions from the Russian wind, at least from the American side, even though there are some public steps which are not discussed or discussed in a very close circle, because the Americans are very strict at some points with the Russians. And the third scenario of the concentration of the military efforts is not adopted because the Russian Federation is the nuclear state, and therefore it's not applied. But that is the dead end, and we cannot see any solution. And finalizing the Third World War, well, that is a kind of very broad interpretation. And I'm more conservative about it, that in basic books it is mentioned that in this context we do not have the Third World War. Nobody is discussing the Third World War, but in my opinion, it is happening already in the cyber dimension. There are the wars in the cyber dimension, and lots of key states are in it, and also those countries which are able to do that. And the moment we have to be careful, we have to be watching the space and the weapons which can be used from space. And by the way, if I'm not mistaken, there are no limitations on using weapon from space, and therefore we will see lots of new things. But this discussion with Mr. Pavlo Klimkin has shown us that the context is the broader context for the evaluation of these scenarios is needed. And there are some certain things which we will not be able to have an impact on without big states. But there are also some things which require strategic vision and consequent action. So we can lose a battle but win the war. We can have some problems with in the diplomacy, but we can win. So the only thing we have to have our vision, our strategy, and to understand how the weak sides can be used or the strong sides can be used, and not only of our enemies but also of our partners. It seems that we are in the sphere where we have to, in a more complicated sphere, which was always there, but now it is more acute. And we have to understand that the scenarios of the political development of our partner, the way how they make the decision, they are changing. As a vivid example is the package of the agreements. I think there are 26 agreements which were signed with many countries. I mean, the signed agreements, for example, with the U.S., you cannot find it on the website at the moment, and it's forgotten, even though we relied on it as a kind of the agreement of the decade. And the office of the president at that time was saying that it is already mentioned in the UN, and it is obligatory for the new administration of the White House. And it seems like there is no continuation of this agreement. So that is something we have to take into account about the things written on the documents, on the paper, and the things happening in reality. A lot of things are going to change, and therefore 1.5 hours are over, and I think that some of the questions we just starting discussing, and as for the other questions, I've heard a bit different perspective, and also in the calm, political, non-emotional way. Thank you very much for watching us. Thank you very much for coming to our center. Thank you, Mr. Pavlo Klimkin, for coming to us, visiting us, and sharing your